Wouldn't it be great if we could remove all of the CO2 from industrial facilities and return the gas deep underground where it would stay for millions of years and not mess with our climate? Well, there is such a technology called carbon capture and storage, or carbon capture and sequestration, CCS, a process where CO2 is removed from the waste gas of combusting fossil fuels and stored permanently underground. But not surprisingly, it's not that simple. I'm not going to dive deep into how it works, as there are lots of different ways to do CCS. I'll put a link in the description to an overview of the state of the industry by the Global CCS Institute. There's also carbon capture and utilization and storage, or CCUS, where you might find a user for the CO2 and therefore you don't need to store it. Utilization is the economic advantage that you get revenue from the sale of the CO2 rather than having to pay to store it. But this isn't a solution that's scalable, as the market for CO2 isn't nearly as large as the amount of it that we're pouring into the atmosphere. Also, if you use CO2 to make something like aviation fuel, then the fossil carbon ends up in the atmosphere after you put so much effort into removing it. So for the sake of this video, I'll focus on CCS. I'm also not going to talk about direct air capture, or DAC. It's the same idea as CCS, but you just set it up anywhere and remove CO2 from regular air. This is much harder since the concentration of carbon dioxide is much lower in ambient air than it is in the exhaust flue of a cement factory or natural gas power plant. I'll also focus on power generation, where there are easy alternatives to fossil fuels, looking at 3 ways to generate electricity: combined cycle natural gas, which is the most efficient way to generate electricity with a fossil fuel, onshore wind, and utility scale solar. As we see here, this is a good representation of what is being built today and the direction the utility industry is going. As a side note, this graph is really striking. Solar power dominates new capacity, and this is only utility scale solar, not counting rooftop residential. There is more battery storage capacity added than natural gas. The U.S. utilities are headed in the right direction. So let's make a back-of-the-envelope calculation about how much it will cost to add CCS to the electricity sector. The carbon dioxide generated by burning natural gas is about 310 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour of electricity. The cost of capturing the CO2 from the flue of a power plant was estimated to be between $50 and $100 a ton in 2019 by the International Energy Agency. Transportation and storage was estimated to be about $10 a ton. If this technology was implemented at scale, the cost might come down, so I'll use $50 per ton as an estimate. So the approximate cost of capturing and storing all of the carbon dioxide from a state-of-the-art natural gas plant is about $15 per megawatt hour. To be clear, I've chosen every possible assumption to make things look good for fossil fuels. So is $15 a megawatt hour a lot? In data from the U.S. Energy Information Agency, we see the levelized cost of electricity for high-efficiency natural gas plant compared to utility-scale wind and solar. The EIA found that in 2022, natural gas is about $10 more expensive than wind and $20 more than solar. Just looking at the cost of production, natural gas is not competitive, even without dealing with the pollution. But natural gas has the advantage that it's on 24/7, even when the wind isn't blowing or the sun shining. To do a fair comparison, we need to add the cost of storage, which is difficult for 2 reasons. One, the technology is quickly improving, as we can see in this graph from Bloomberg NEF. The magenta line is the cost of battery storage, and we see it's dropped by a factor of 8 in 10 years. So any estimate made today would be out of date tomorrow. The other is that the amount of storage needed depends on the climate, the transmission grid, and what other resources are on the grid nearby. For instance, if you go all solar, you know you'll need a lot of storage because you have no power at night. But if you go wind and solar, the wind tends to blow at night and is strongest in the winter when solar is weakest. So you'll need a lot less storage than if you went entirely with solar. Also, if your grid is connected to resources that are far away, maybe the wind isn't blowing locally, but it is blowing somewhere you can import power from. I have an entire video on that topic which you can view here. The analysis by Lazard shown here includes storage with solar and wind estimates. Lazard's analysis includes all subsidies other than the cost of pollution, which is free in their model. If we add $15 a megawatt hour to the cost of natural gas combined cycle power plants, we get a range from 54 to 116, compared to 42 to 114 for wind and 66 to 102 for solar, both including storage. Price drops in storage are likely to continue or even accelerate as new battery chemistries optimized for the grid rather than mobile devices like phones and cars come online. In addition, the cost of wind and solar are also decreasing, though at a much slower rate. Combined cycle natural gas power plants are a mature technology, and there's no reason to expect the cost to decrease significantly. So the fact that natural gas is barely competitive today, when the cost of CCS is included, means it's becoming less competitive every year. In 2008, I was part of a group that opposed a coal and coke gasification power plant in Washington state proposed by Energy Northwest. The previous year, Washington had passed ESSB 6001, which required all new power plants to emit no more carbon dioxide than a state-of-the-art natural gas plant. Unmitigated, this plant would have emitted about twice as much as allowed by law. Energy Northwest applied for a permit, hoping that this requirement would be ignored. The response by the state was that they would need to capture and sequester about half their emissions. Energy Northwest withdrew their proposal. So in 2008, this project wasn't economically feasible given the requirement for CCS for half of its climate pollution. Since that time, wind, solar, and battery technologies have gotten significantly cheaper, making the case for CCS even harder. There are those who believe that CCS is a panacea, or at least will allow us to continue to drill, baby, drill. So it's time to require CCS on all new carbon-intensive sites, including power generation, steel mills, and the manufacturing of cement and fertilizer. The federal government alone has invested $5.3 billion on developing CCS, according to the Congressional Budget Office. There are huge tax credits for CCS in the Infrastructure and Jobs Act. So the American people have paid generously to support the research and have agreed to foot a big chunk of the cost of doing CCS. Given all of that, it seems reasonable to require it on all large emitters going forward. There's been enough time and resources dedicated to the technology that if it's not ready now, it never will be. This additional cost might be the nail in the coffin of natural gas for electricity, and that would be a good thing. Given the direction of the utility industry is going, it might be as dead as coal even without requiring CCS. But the requirement would be important for industries where there is not an easy replacement for fossil fuels, like cement and fertilizer. These are industrial processes where the replacements for fossil fuels are not yet ready for commercialization, though there are companies working on them. By requiring CCS at these facilities, we provide a level playing field for new technologies that are more climate friendly. Some might argue that this puts the U.S. at a disadvantage to other countries that don't have this kind of policy. That's why a carbon border adjustment is critical, and I'll cover that in a future video. According to data from the IEA, there are 37 CCS and CCUS projects active in the world with a total sequestration of about 40 million metric tons per year, about 1/10 of 1% of our current emissions. If we also include all planned and under construction facilities, we get about 280 metric tons of carbon dioxide per year, or 0.7%. CCS can play a part in our path to zero emissions in industrial niches where there aren't inherently low carbon options. If you're interested in learning more, I recommend a recent video on the Just Have a Think channel. He delves into a recent study on CCS that goes into analysis like this, but is more detailed. The results are the same. Personally, I like the back of the envelope calculations that I went through here as they help me understand what's happening better. If you've learned something, please like and subscribe and share with anyone you know who thinks that CCS will save the day.